Hey, good afternoon to you. Welcome to Noon on Saturday. Those of you that are with us live and those of you that listen later by going to our podcast there at wowo.com. However it is you're listening to us, glad you're here. Hi, everybody. Pat Miller, and looking forward to a great program with you today. Let me talk to you about just 4 or 5 things that I think that we need to know on this date to get a better glimpse of where we are. Some of these are items that we'll pick up in earnest a little bit later with a few longer segments, but let me just do them briefly, shall we? Number one, the world-famous prisoner swap. The Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovich, former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, and Russian-American journalist Asu Kurmasheva have landed in the U.S. following this historic prisoner exchange between Russia and the West. It was a rather emotional scene Thursday in the evening as a plane landed. The returnees were met by President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, or as she tried to claim at a funeral down in Houston this week, President Kamala Harris, and their joyous families on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Let me start by saying, I'm glad they're home. I'm glad they're back. Why did this take so long? The agreement involved months, it is said, of complex negotiations with allies and adversaries alike, involving 7 countries and 24 prisoners. The bottom of that, we're not 2 yet. We got 3. How many did Russia get? And how many of our negotiating countries between us and them also had prisoners released, either from Russia or from us, to help put it all together? The swap included the release of convicted Russian assassin Vadim Krasikov and other individuals accused of spying or accused of cybercrimes. Campaign funds, the Donald Trump campaign said Thursday that the operation raised nearly $139 million in July for the former president's election effort and amassed $327 million in cash reserves for the roughly 3 months sprint to the election. Trump's total represent a jump from June, where his campaign and aligned committees reported bringing in nearly $112 million. But the July total was absolutely dwarfed by the fundraising haul of his newly minted Democratic rival, Vice President Kamala Harris. The Harris campaign said it raked in a whopping $310 million in its July fundraising efforts, with more than $200 million raised in the first week of her candidacy. The Harris team has $377 million cash on hand, marking the latest sign of how the change at the top of the Democratic ticket has energized grassroots and high-dollar supporters. Is that the whole story? No, and we'll see more later about why it is that she has the cash that she has on hand. Here's the thing to note, folks. The fight is on. The fight is on. We're ready to go after it, and we'll see how all that plays out. We now turn to the Middle East. Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh will be buried today in Qatar as his killing raises fears that Israel's war with the Palestinian militant group in Gaza could spiral into a fully fledged Middle East conflict. President Biden said the assassination had not helped the chances of a ceasefire deal and expressed concern about the escalating tensions in the region after Iran vowed to avenge this death. Biden is now weighing more U.S. defenses in the Middle East as the U.S. prepares for an Iranian retaliation against Israel that could include an attack on American forces. If Iran attacks forces of ours, will it take this administration as long to respond as it did to innocent people being held as terrorists and spies in Russia? Or will it just be long and drawn out? This one was killed in Tehran using a hidden explosive device, CNN said, becoming the third high-profile figure in an Iran-backed militant group to be killed in recent weeks. Airline fees. Going on trips here coming up in the next few weeks, the Biden administration has proposed a new rule banning airlines from charging parents extra fees for their kids to be seated next to them. Families don't need any additional stresses or costs when flying on how demanding it can be to be a parent flying and how it can cost you so much just with your kids. Who said that? Pete Buttigieg, transportation secretary, trying very much to position himself to be a vice presidential pick when he announced the proposal. White House officials say they're fee-free family seating. Get that, fee-free family seating. This proposal could potentially save parents up to $200 per round-trip flight. The rule would require airlines to seat children 13 and under next to their parents within 48 hours of purchasing the ticket. The proposed mandate still needs to clear a public comment period, and we'll see if that works. And here again, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's good. If I've got an 8-year-old kid, I'd rather they be seated right next to me. The thing that gets me is if you go on your airline and you book the seats and you book the seating on the flight, which I always do, don't you already know where your seat is? Are these last-minute flights? Does this put an extra cost on the airline for moving things around? Here's the bottom line. Okay, and make no mistake about this. This is a situation where the government is saying, here's what needs to happen, and they put out this mandate. It costs the government nothing. This is like forgiving student loans. It costs the federal government nothing. We seem to have an administration that is hell-bent on giving out all kinds of benefits and discounts and paybacks and lack of fees on anything that they want to do that doesn't cost them. Now, to show we're not alone in our way we do politics around here, let's go to Venezuela, shall we? Now, if you've been listening at all this week, you already know where I'm going, because the U.S. has said that it is clear that President Nicolás Maduro lost the popular vote in Venezuela's last week election. As key opposition leader said, she is hiding in fear for her life. Does this sound familiar? Now, first of all, the U.S. said it's very clear that Maduro lost the popular vote. Okay, U.S., by how many? Biden administration, by how many votes did he lose? Where in Venezuela did he lose? Did he lose just in the city or in the rural? By how much? Maduro had promised free and fair elections. Man, I've heard that before. If I had $1 for every time that somebody in my government told me our elections are going to be free and fair, if I had $1 every time that happened, I could retire. I love you, but I wouldn't be sitting here doing a program today. Okay, I'd be doing something else with my Saturday afternoon. The process ended up being marred with allegations of foul play. Opposition figures were arrested. Their key leader, Maria Corina Machado, banned from running. Opposition witnesses alleged denied access to the vote count, and overseas Venezuelans largely unable to cast their ballots. Protests broke out across Venezuela after the country's electoral body announced Maduro the winner with 51% of the votes. Is it okay if I say this is going to be something we really need to look into? Because I think something stinks here from the head. So the Venezuelan elections, the airline fees, the Middle East problems, the campaign funds, and the prisoner swap. When we come back, choosing a new way of broadcasting, I believe, the president, the prime minister of Israel, is promising that they are going to send their next message to Iran, and they're not going to do it by email. They're going to do it by airmail. The Israeli airmail message to the Ayatollah. Will they do it? I don't think there's any question that if Israel feels that it is logical for them to do it, they will do it. There'll be no question about it. Just know this. If Israel does it again, announcing that they want to do this to protect themselves, announcing they want to do this so that they can avenge against those that try to hurt and kill Israelis, and we have an administration in Washington, D.C. that stands ready to stand against Israel. More coming up straight ahead. And welcome back, everybody. Hi, it's Pat Miller with you on this Saturday. Very glad you're with us. Remember, when we're here, you can send us a text at 260-447-1190. That's 260-447-1190. Or you can email me when I'm on the air or even after I'm gone. And that's pretty easy. Pat Miller, that's all one word, no dots or dashes. Pat Miller at WOWO.com. Always glad to hear from you. Well, let's talk a little bit about everything going on now with Israel and Iran and where it puts us as an American nation. Since the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, Since the unexpected end of Joe Biden's re-election campaign, there's a lot going on the American political scene. While the Americans are focused on Trump versus Kamala and that matchup, events around the world are quickly spinning out of control, and we're not even really looking at them as we should, either by our government or by our journalists. I'm going to talk about journalism later. Is it too late? Can the United States return to what I'm going to refer to as old school journalism? That conversation comes up later. But first, in response to the assassination that was done because the Israelis attacked and killed Ismail Haniyeh, and he did it in Tehran. Haniyeh was attending the inauguration of Iran's new president and had just met with Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei before he was killed. So in response to that assassination, Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued an order to retaliate against Israel in an unspecified manner. If you're anybody watching the world stage, and certainly if you're anybody in and around Israel, your antenna are way up. The Washington Times said that while he didn't confirm Israel's role in the death of Khamenei, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged that the IDF on Tuesday killed a senior Hezbollah commander, Fouad Shukr, in an airstrike that was done in southern Beirut, Lebanon. The killing was in retaliation for the deaths of 12 children in a July 27 strike on the Israeli Druze. Now, the U.S. denies any responsibility. Oh, we had nothing to do with it. We had no part of this retaliation. Anthony Blinken, supposed to be our Secretary of State, that's what he told the Singaporean news outlet, that the U.S. had no involvement in the attack. Why did he say that to the Washington Times? Why didn't he say it to the New York Post or the New York Times? Why didn't he say it to the Atlanta Journal? Why didn't he tell that to a big news outlet here in the U.S.? Is it that they're hoping to make a statement but then have it kind of float under our radar, and it's kind of working? When's the last time you heard anybody on any network, including Fox, go to great lengths to talk about how the fact that the U.S. had no involvement with that killing there in Tehran? None whatsoever. Look, Blinken is hoping that ceasefire negotiations will continue instead of further escalations, but I think it remains unclear how the death of Haniyeh will impact the discussions. Seemingly a world away, these events could help determine the candidate voters ultimately choose to lead the free world in 2025. Who is going to take the oath of office in this country on January the 20th of this coming year? These events are going to play into this. In his debate with Trump, Biden said that Trump must have emboldened our enemies and left them concluding that there's no one in charge in the Oval Office. Well, that's the American response now, because they think there's nobody in charge of the Oval Office. Kamala isn't there yet, along with her Freudian slip down in Houston, Texas, but she's not president yet. She's not president ever, I hope. But in this fast-moving news cycle, remember one thing. Iran has long enjoyed the support of Democrat administrations. Now, Pat, you don't know that. Go back a little bit. Go back to Biden, where he sent $1.5 billion to the West Bank and Gaza, supposedly for social services and infrastructure, which did what? It allowed the Palestinian Authority access to money for Hamas and for other organizations. The Obama administration sent $150 billion with a B, $150 billion, including $400 million in untraceable cash for a prisoner release. If everything is above board between our government and their government, and it's for the release of hostages, and you're going to send them $150 billion, why is $400 million of it in untraceable cash? Why is that? Do you really think that $400 million went anywhere near the coffers of Iran? No, the pockets of the president and the sitting Ayatollah were emboldened a great deal. The result of all that, Iran has gone on a terrorism spree ever since that money from Biden and later from Obama. The region has become very, 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 very unstable. We're seeing the consequences of this failed approach, where Democrats think funding our enemies around the world is a way to keep the peace. We're doing this for the peace. In a Wall Street Journal article, It says this: the Iranian proxy Hezbollah has been firing at Israel for months, destroying villages and slaughtering innocent children out playing soccer. There is no siege, there is no occupation, yet the Biden administration is mediating between Hezbollah and Israel like there's some kind of a real estate broker. Instead of sending Iran an unequivocal, threatening message, it is sending advisor Amos Hochstein to plead with Hezbollah to halt the rocket fire and offer Israeli territorial concessions. End of quote. So now the U.S. is getting involved with more than words. Just this week, U.S. fighters struck Iranian-backed militia groups near Baghdad. The strike came on the same day that Israel killed Shukr in Beirut. Joe Biden is not going to be president in a few months, one way or another. So it's worth considering, how would Kamala Harris deal with what's going on? How would Joe Biden deal with what's going on? Look, the world is on fire. We need to realize that it's on fire. How would we respond under the people who are before us right now trying to be our president? Kamala Harris has never, ever, ever strongly condemned the hateful and violent anti-Israel protests that swept across college campuses earlier this year in our country. Or the more recent ones, which include rioters defacing statues in front of Union Station. I stayed at a hotel last time in D.C., right across from Union Station. I know the statues they're talking about. They defaced them. She also refused to attend Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress. Now, let me just say one thing. Well, Pat, that was just ceremonial. If you're the vice president of the United States, you are the president of the Senate. It's your job to sit there and to listen to what a foreign dignitary has to say. If the president of the United States right now, Ms. Harris, was a Republican, would you not go to the State of the Union address? Is that not the job? Because you're sitting there, not in your personal aspects, not in your personal leanings or your personal desires. You're sitting there as the president of the Senate. And let me just say one other thing. If you have an actual presentation being done on the nation's capital by a president, by someone who has been invited by the body of the Congress to come and to speak, a foreign dignitary, a foreign leader, if you're welcoming somebody home, if they decide to have a joint session with the three people who have been received back from Russia, who were inadvertently and mistakenly and unilaterally mistakenly held as prisoners in Russia, if you want to have an address to Congress by those three, I say do it. Knock yourselves out. And every member of Congress needs to be there. Every member of Congress needs to be there. The New York Post reports that congressional Republicans are now investigating the national security advisor to Kamala Harris, Philip Gordon. Why? What difference does that make? Well, because Philip Gordon, and more of this is going to come out before I sit down with you next Saturday, Philip Gordon, security advisor to Kamala Harris as Vice President of the United States, has strong connections to an Iranian influence operation. Which one, and does it affect him? And does it affect the vice president wanting to be president of the United States? Does it affect Kamala Harris? If you're her security advisor and you're with her 3 to 4 times a week, how could it not affect your view on things? That's where we are so far. More coming up. This country, can we get back to old school journalism as we used to know? That comes up right after this break. Glad you're with us here on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. Hey, welcome back. Thanks for making it through the bottom of the hour with us here on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. I'm the aforementioned Pat Miller. An article that caught my attention because it speaks of somebody I've never met, I've never interviewed, but I've read a lot of his stuff. I did back in the day, and I continue to do it. Ron Yates is a guy that came to fruition as a true journalist back when I was in high school. I didn't know if I was Republican or Democrat. I didn't know right or left. I just knew that girl was a blonde, that girl was a redhead, the other was a brunette. You get what I'm saying. Ron Yates, he was initially the dean of the College of Communications at the University of Illinois. He is an old school journalist. Now, before you write him off, you say, that's the old way. That doesn't matter now. He's got history, he's got education, and he has got a career. And it began at a time in his profession when it was known for serious, sometimes even life-threatening investigative work and a passion to find the truth. not just a passion to find somebody to resoundingly agree with your prejudice or mine. These people were out there trying to find the truth. He received his degree in journalism from the University of Kansas, go Jayhawks, where he was editor of the award-winning student newspaper. In his senior year, he was invited to Chicago to interview at the Chicago Tribune, along with 2 other college students from across the U.S. At the interview, all 3 were asked what they wanted to be. One young man said, "I want to be the best movie critic," and he got that chance. That was Gene Siskel. The other said, "I want to be a columnist," and that was columnist Clarence Page. Ron said, "I want to be a foreign correspondent." All 3 got their dream jobs. So in the many years that Ron worked for the Tribune, he covered, if you look back through history, some of the most harrowing things that happened around the globe in the 20th century. The Vietnam War, the fall of Saigon, the collapse of Cambodia, the communist Khmer Rouge regime, the Tiananmen Square massacre in China, if you remember the young Chinese young man standing out in Tiananmen Square, standing in front of a Chinese tank, refusing to let it go around, daring it to run him over. He received numerous awards for his work. He was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize 3 times, including 1976. And the one he lost to was Sidney Schonberg from the New York Times, who won for his coverage of the fall of Phnom Penh. Now, Schonberg's story, if you've ever seen the movie, it was made famous in the Academy Award-winning film The Killing Fields. And it was incredible. I've been writing about the media's role, Yates says, in massive propaganda campaigns for several years now. The press is now telling the public that new Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris was never really the border czar, despite President Joe Biden having bestowed those responsibilities upon her, and despite the fact that the title the media themselves used for the past 3 years was, in fact, that she was the border czar. Remember, when he went into school in journalism, he said, "I was an old school journalist. We had 3 things we needed to do. We had to do our investigative work. We had to find passion for the truth, and we had to not stop it until the truth was before us. We could not go in with our personal bias. We could not go in going, what do you think?" We had to go in and say, let the truth be what the truth is. When a journalist goes out and they're covering a fire and a big house is on fire, their first job is not to say, "Well, I'll bet I know who started this. I'll bet it was so-and-so." And the next thing you know, that becomes lead in the... No, their first job is to say, such and such a house at such and such a corner in such and such neighborhood is on fire. There are 6 fire trucks here. There are 72 fire personnel here. That's journalism. Tell me what's going on. If things come out of an investigation later, not conducted by you as a journalist, but by somebody else, you have to be ready that who it was you think started the fire is immaterial. It's second place. It's second class. Tell me who really started the fire. So Ron Yates is giving his assessment here on modern journalism. And he starts by telling us about a recent Reuters poll which asked residents from 46 different countries about their trust in media. Do you have any idea of the 46 different countries that were asked about their view of media? Who came in last? The United States of America. Only 29% of Americans trust the media. That should bother us a lot. It should bother you even if you're on the right. If you watch whatever show you watch on MSNBC, or if you watch it on Fox News, or you watch it on one of your conservative media outlets, stop and listen to it for a minute and stop just going, "Yeah, that's it, give it to them." Stop and listen to what's said. Is what they're saying making sense? Trust in journalism in this country is coming in dead last, 29%. Look, even in countries that recently came out of communism, Romania, the Czech Republic, they view media higher than we do. That says a lot about us. Look, Americans do not trust the press. Yates went on in the piece that he wrote, and he explained because they know that media personalities are twisting facts to fit their preferred political narrative, and they're suppressing information that doesn't. We're being gaslit, folks. We're being gaslit. We've been gaslit for 3.5 years. We all watched Joe Biden in absolute decline, and we're being told he's sharp as a tack. How many times do we hear that? That he's sharp? No, he's just about as sharp as a bowling ball. Funny line. Yeah, it makes, sure, he's not sharp at all. Okay, ha ha ha, you win your joke. I don't want to win jokes. I want to win back the position of being the leader of the free world, and I want to win back the position that the United States is the one most revered. Now, Yates says there's several causes of this problem. First, journalism schools no longer teach their students the craft. They just don't. Would we stand for the same thing in medical schools? And be careful, because in the age of Fauci, you've got some people in high posts that are still connected to medical schools that are starting to bend their medical findings based on their political understandings. We can't allow that. But for the most part, if you're going to be a doctor, there are certain medical things you have to know. You have to learn them. Yates said, when I was in school, what was pounded into our heads was to be as objective as absolutely possible. Subvert your own biases. If you don't, you just become a propagandist. He said today's journalism graduates who don't think that it's their job to report the news, they think it's their job to get people to make the right choices. In other words, it's not my job to report the news, it's my job to help make the news. That's ridiculous. You're not being voted into the office. You're not a secretary of something in a cabinet of a president of the United States. You're a journalist. What happened? The who, what, when, where, why? Where is that in your story? Yates also kind of bemoans a little bit the loss of what's known as the traditional newsroom. Quoting him, young journalists had mentors who helped them weed opinions out of news articles. Accuracy was most important. In fact, folks, accuracy has to be important. Who your friend is, who you had dinner with last night in New York, who your friend was around the water cooler, that's immaterial. If you like that kind of stuff, fine, but it can't find its way into your articles, and it can't find your way into bias. Accuracy is ultimately the most important. When I pick up a newspaper, when I turn on a newswire, I have to know that it's accurate. If you continue to include your opinion or your inaccuracies, if you did it back in the day of Yates coming up, you were fired immediately on the spot. No waiting. No, oh, I'm really sorry. They weren't sorry. They had to protect what was happening in their newsprint or on their vocal opinions. Now, we're going to get to a little bit about what he said in just a minute when we're talking here about our gentleman Ron Yates, graduate of University of Illinois, who became one of the forefront in all of journalists throughout the country. And we're going to talk about what it is that he thinks is happening now. Is there a distorted balance of news right now? And if there is, what on earth can we possibly do about it? Old-time journalism, can it be found? And do we want it to be found? We'll talk about all this straight ahead right here on WOWO. This is WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. And we're back. Glad you're still with us here on this Saturday as we are getting ready to finish up our first hour. Remember, we're here every Saturday from noon to 2 here on WOWO, talking about Ron Yates and a gentleman who still lives but not as active in journalism as he was. He began his career back in 1971, so it's been a while. But there's so much wisdom in what he says. He talks about the fact that journalism is not what it was, but we'd better reclaim it. The question is, can we reclaim it? And do we have the nerve to reclaim it? Those are all questions that he asked. His assessment of journalism today is nothing less than seething when he talked about the fact that journalism, Americans trust our press in this country less than all of the other 46 countries talked to about all over the country. Less than 46 other countries, we come in dead last in trusting our news. Some causes of the problem, he said, first of all, journalism schools no longer teaching their students this. Second, and we just finished this part, the traditional newsroom is gone. The young journalists had mentors that were helping them all the time, weeding out opinions out of their news articles. Accuracy was preeminent. You have to have accuracy. If you're continued to put up opinion in your accuracies and accuracies suffered at the feet of your opinions, you were summarily fired. And he talked about the distorted balance. And we'll take this and then go on. 26%, back in 1971, 26% of reporters identified as Republicans, 35% as Democrats, and the rest as independents. Okay, 26, 35 independents. Got it? Today, 71% of reporters identify as Democrats. 25% identify as Republicans? No. 25% identify as independents. Only 4% identify as Republicans or conservatives. Now, he lays a lot of this, not even so much at the institutions that they work for now, but he lays it at the feet of the places where they received their college education. It's the leftward lurch of higher education that bugs him. 90% of the faculty, he says, at a lot of our universities are run by leftists. And this is as true at journalistic schools as other. And finally, he says, the organization responsible for monitoring the profession, they're dropping the ball too. The Society of Professional Journalists isn't doing its job. He quoted something, the SPJ Code of Ethics. The SPJ Code of Ethics, the Society of Professional Journalism. He said they're not doing their job. And they had an ethics page which admonishes journalists to do what? What would the ethics page say? To seek truth and report it, to be accurate and fair, to label advocacy and commentary, and hold those powers with power accountable. In other words, if you're going to give opinion, come out and say it. Don't do it on the news page of the Washington Times. Do it on the editorial page. And do the same if you happen to be on televised media or radio media. If you're coming out and saying, this is who I am and this is what I think, that's fine. Hold people with the power of the media, hold them accountable. And today's media doesn't do any of that. They don't seek truth and report that. They're not accurate and fair. They don't label advocacy and commentary. And if somebody with power gets out of alignment with these, they don't hold them accountable. The SPJ needs to hold their feet to the fire, and they're not, according to Ron Yates, they are not doing it. Pretty blunt about his challenges to Americans trying to get the facts. What do you do? Here, let's say you're an American and you want to find the facts, not what Pat Miller thinks, not what Ron DeSantis thinks, not what Rush Limbaugh thought. I mean, no. Take all those into equivalent agreement and sift through them, but you have to be able to find truth. Ron Yates says it's not going to be easy. We have information overload. That's part of our problem. There's so much media, you almost can't consume all of it. We've got information overload. Media outlets from both political sides, by the way, are not telling truth. So the onus falls upon the consumer, who has to look at what liberal outlets are saying and what conservative outlets are saying and decide for themselves what the truth is. Now, how do you do that? Well, when I was in sales, we always did a Ben Franklin close. You take a piece of paper and you draw a line all the way down the middle of the page, top to bottom. On the left, okay, if you make this decision, and in sales, if you did this by, what are the good options? This will happen, this will happen, this will happen. Then on the other side, the bad options, what will happen? That's called a Ben Franklin close. Does the good outweigh the bad? Does the bad outweigh the good? When you hear things or when you read things, including Pat Miller, draw a line down the middle. What did he say? And then, based on what he said, which seems to be true and which seems to be false. And be accurate and fair. Don't worry about my feelings. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. And do the same. Do the same with Kayla Blakeslee. If you want great truth, and I think for the most part Kayla falls directly on the right, turn to Fort Wayne's Morning News with Kayla Blakeslee. In the afternoon, we've got some great entertainment going on for you because you've got The Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson. Casey, for the most part, is going to be extremely truthful. That's important to know. If I listen to him, now have there been times when he has said something and I'm like, I don't know if that's where I'm at. Now, there's a difference in saying, I don't know if I would have said it that way, and there's something different in saying, that's not the truth as I understand it. I can tell you, in the last month where I've listened to Casey quite a bit, I've never found him on the wrong side of truth. I have had to come to you in the past over the last 24 years on this station, whether it was Saturday mornings when I went to the daily program in the afternoon or now back to Saturdays at noon. I have never, ever, 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 ever had somebody come at me and say, I don't believe what you said. I think it's untrue. Now, I've got people that come to me and say, I don't agree with what you said because of da-da-da-da-da. Okay, now you're just pitting opinion against opinion. I don't believe what you said is true. I have made a phone call to people, literally, who didn't believe that I was actually calling them. Why wouldn't I? And we talked it through. Did everybody I talked to come over to my way of thinking? No, not always. Some did, because what they were attacking me on, they hadn't done their homework yet. So you got to be able to look at that, and you've got to be able to say, look, we've got an information overload. Media outlets from all over the place are not dealing in truth. So it falls on you and me to look at the liberal outlets and, by fairness, look at the conservative outlets also and saying, is Sean Hannity saying that because it's true, or is Sean Hannity just looking for some affection from the Trump campaign? You've got to look at all of it. You've got to be able to look at all of it. Most people that you see on TV are not trained journalists. They just give their opinions, okay? When you sit and you listen to our afternoon program during the week here on WOWO, when you listen to Dan Bongino from noon to 3, Dan Bongino is strong, he's powerful, he has a background in many of the areas that he talks about, but he is not an established journalist by the definition of journalism. Dan Bongino will come out and tell you, what I'm telling you is because I was this kind of an agent for this long or this kind of an agent for that long. I will tell you, at the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, I listened to Bongino a lot, and everything that he said to me was verifiable. Everything that he said to me was verifiable about how the shooter up on the roof was ignored, how the Secret Service dropped their guard. Yates encourages us by the new media and everything that's out there, by the free press, by everything out of the New York Times or the Washington Post, with all the journal experts that they've got, with Musk buying X. He says, we've got to go in there. Journalism in this country is not dead, but it is in a coma. It is in a coma. But it's going to take revolution in these newsrooms back to the old rules. We've got to go back to the old rules. I invite you to go and look up his site, ronaldyatesbooks.com/blog. That's ronaldyatesbooks.com/blog. Incredible stuff. That's it for hour number 1. Hour number 2 here on this Saturday, coming up with you straight ahead here on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.